What happens when a TikTok prank meets unwavering respect? Welcome to the channel. Today, we're diving into a story that will make you rethink the power of silence. Picture this. A group of young TikTokers tries to get a reaction from a stoic Buckingham Palace guard. But instead of the expected outburst, something much more powerful happens. What unfolds is a masterclass in respect, as the crowd responds in an unexpected way. So, where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel, because tomorrow we'll be sharing another unforgettable story you won't want to miss. It was a typical day at Buckingham Palace, the Golden Gate standing tall against the backdrop of a cloudless sky. The sound of tourists' chatter filled the air, their voices a soft hum in the background as they snapped photos, capturing the iconic palace and the stoic guards standing watch. The energy was light, casual. Some were busy sharing their excitement on social media, while others admired the grandeur of the place, oblivious to what was about to unfold. Among the crowd, a group of 3 young TikTokers stood out. Their excitement was palpable, each of them holding their phones high, ready to create content for their followers. With the confidence of social media influencers, they whispered among themselves, their eyes gleaming with a mischievous spark. "Watch this," one of them said, a smirk crossing his face. "I'll make him move." The others chuckled in agreement, clearly intrigued by the challenge. The group quickly huddled together, discussing their plan. They positioned themselves directly in front of one of the guards, a tall, uniformed figure who stood perfectly still, his eyes forward and unwavering. The TikTokers, in their attempt to break the guard's composure, began to dance, their movements exaggerated and energetic. They twirled, jumped, and threw their arms into dramatic poses, trying to draw some reaction from the soldier. It was all for show, an act designed to get attention, to get that perfect shot for their followers. Laughter erupted among the group, each of them amused by their own antics. But the guard remained unmoved, his face impassive, his posture as rigid as the stone that surrounded them. The young men and women couldn't help but feel a rush of excitement as they continued their playful mockery. But what they didn't realize was the gravity of the space they were in. Buckingham Palace wasn't just any tourist attraction. It was a symbol of history and tradition, something much more than their fleeting viral moment. As they danced, the crowd of onlookers, some curious and others amused, grew in number. The clicking of cameras and the buzz of excited chatter filled the air, yet there was a distinct difference now. What had begun as a light-hearted attempt to get a laugh from the soldier was starting to feel off. The more they danced, the more the atmosphere shifted, as if the very presence of the guard was a reminder of something deeper, something more profound than a TikTok stunt. The TikTokers continued their antics, laughing, shouting, and striking more exaggerated poses, but the guard stood completely still. His eyes were fixed ahead, unwavering, as if he couldn't hear the laughter or see the playful gestures. He didn't flinch, not even for a second. Despite the chaotic energy around him, his composure remained absolute. The wind blew softly, causing the feathers of his tall bearskin hat to flutter gently, but still, the guard remained as still as a statue, a silent monument to discipline. The crowd, once full of chatter and excitement, began to take notice. The TikTokers, expecting a reaction, found none. Instead of a shift in posture or a scolding, the guard's stillness began to create an atmosphere that felt almost heavy. People slowly stopped what they were doing, some even lowering their phones, eyes turning to the guard with a new sense of respect. The guard's stillness, it seemed, had a power of its own. The young group of influencers paused for a moment, unsure of what to do. They had been so confident, so sure that they could break him. But they hadn't. They hadn't even made him blink. It was as if he wasn't part of their world at all, as if he existed in a different space, one where their games and challenges meant nothing. The once bustling scene began to change. The laughter faded into silence. The murmurs of the crowd, the clicking of cameras all stopped. People began to watch the guard, their expressions changing from amusement to something more serious, more reflective. The TikTokers tried again, attempting more elaborate moves, but it was no use. They were no longer the center of attention. The audience's focus had shifted entirely to the guard, who continued to stand, unyielding, in the face of their challenge. Breeze swept through the crowd, and the leaves rustled in the trees above. The stillness of the moment seemed to grow even deeper, suffusing the air with a sense of reverence. The group of young influencers, once loud and full of confidence, were now noticeably quieter. There was something in the air, something unspoken, that had begun to change their energy. They were no longer sure of themselves. They hadn't anticipated the power of the guard's unwavering presence. And then it happened. A subtle shift in the crowd. One by one, people began to turn their gaze away from the TikTokers and toward the soldier. No one said anything, but the collective shift in energy was unmistakable. The crowd, once full of playful amusement, now felt like a quiet, unified force. No one was laughing anymore, no one was filming. They were all just watching the guard, watching the moment unfold. For the first time since they began, the TikTokers were met with silence, a silence that spoke louder than any reaction could have. The guard had never moved. He had never spoken. But in his stillness, he had done something far more powerful than any physical gesture. He had commanded respect, not through force or words, but through unwavering discipline. And in doing so, he had turned the crowd's attention away from the prank and onto something much deeper, something that didn't require a single word. The TikTokers, now feeling the weight of the silence, exchanged uncertain glances. Their attempts to provoke the guard had failed, and with each passing second, the energy in the crowd shifted. The once excited tourists who had been capturing the moment for their social media feeds were no longer amused. Instead, a quiet tension began to settle over the scene. The first sign of this change came from an elderly woman standing nearby. She was watching the young group closely, her gaze sharp despite her age. Without saying a word, she slowly shook her head, a subtle but firm gesture that spoke volumes. Her disapproval was clear, and it seemed to ripple through the crowd. The young TikTokers' faces flushed, but no one spoke up. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. Then a mother, holding her small child by the hand, stepped forward. With a soft but deliberate motion, she pulled her child away from the scene, guiding them out of the frame of the TikTokers' cameras. There was no anger, no outburst, just a quiet decision to distance herself and her child from the chaos. The message was unspoken but powerful. This was no longer entertainment. This was no longer a game. From the back of the crowd, a voice rose above the hushed murmurs. A man, standing tall in a military jacket, spoke just loud enough for those around him to hear. His voice was calm, but the weight of his words hung in the air. Enough. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a demand. But there was no mistaking the authority in his tone. The crowd shifted again, and the energy that had been playful moments before was now filled with quiet resolve. The man's words were not just a dismissal of the TikTokers' antics, but a subtle command that echoed through the space, like the ripple of a stone dropped into still water. Then something even more striking happened. A tourist from Asia, who had been quietly observing from the side, took a step forward. Without a word, she reached into her bag, pulled out a flyer, and gently held it up to the camera lens of the TikTokers. The camera now had a piece of paper blocking its view, effectively stopping the filming in its tracks. She didn't speak. She didn't shout. She simply blocked the shot, offering a silent but clear act of defiance. The TikTokers, their faces now a mix of confusion and embarrassment, looked around at the shifting crowd. No one had yelled. No one had stormed up to them. There were no outbursts or angry confrontations, but the entire atmosphere had changed. The crowd, once laughing and filming, now seemed to silently agree on one thing. They would not condone this mockery. One by one, people turned their backs to the group. It wasn't a coordinated movement, but it was undeniable. The collective energy of the crowd had made its decision. The young TikTokers were now completely isolated. The camera lenses that had once eagerly captured their every move were now turned away. The crowd had spoken with its actions, not its words, and the TikTokers found themselves fading into the background of their own video. They hadn't made the guard move, but in that quiet, unspoken moment, the crowd had sent a much stronger message. The power of respect, of silence, had prevailed, and the TikTokers were left to absorb the gravity of what had just transpired. They had failed to entertain, they had failed to provoke. And in the process, they had learned something far more important than any viral moment could teach. The young TikTokers stood frozen, their faces flushed with embarrassment. The playful energy they had come with now felt like a distant memory, replaced by the heavy realization of their failed attempt. There was no shouting, no confrontation, just a slow, collective turning away from them. One by one, the crowd had made its point with nothing more than silence. The TikTokers were no longer the center of attention, and the attention they had wanted, those views, those likes, had slipped away in an instant. The group of three exchanged awkward glances. The weight of the moment settling in. There was no triumphant energy here, no viral sensation. Instead, the only thing they could feel was the sting of humiliation. The guard had not reacted, the crowd had not rallied behind them, and now the space around them seemed to hold an air of quiet disapproval. No one had yelled at them, no one had raised their voice in anger, but in their own way, everyone had spoken louder than any words could. A girl from the group who had been the most confident moments earlier looked back toward the guard. Her eyes met his, but he showed no sign of recognition. He was still standing, there as motionless and composed as he had been from the beginning. She hesitated for a brief moment, her gaze softening before she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a sign of defeat, but rather a silent acknowledgement, a wordless apology. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected the crowd to react this way, hadn't expected her own actions to be called into question so publicly. The nod was a quiet gesture, but it carried more weight than any shout or protest ever could. It was an unspoken understanding, a brief moment of respect between her and the guard, a silent admission of where the true power lay. The guard stood there, as unmoving as ever, not acknowledging the group's shift. He didn't need to. His presence alone had already made the impact. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, hadn't needed to. As the group of TikTokers turned and began to walk away, there was no applause, no cheers for their viral attempt. Just the soft rustle of the breeze through the trees and the distant murmur of the crowd, all of whom had made their decision. The power of silence had settled over the scene like a blanket, leaving behind a collective sense of reflection. The young group, once full of laughter and confidence, now moved in quiet defeat. They had come to create something to share with the world, but in the end, it was the world that had shared something with them. In a moment of collective silence, they learned a lesson about respect, about discipline, and about the deeper, unspoken forces at play in public spaces. The power of a single, unwavering presence had overshadowed their attempt at entertainment, and no words were needed to understand that. The guard, still standing tall, remained unaffected by their exit. He had done nothing but stand his ground. And in that simple act, he had made an impact that none of their tricks, antics, or challenges could have ever achieved. His stillness had spoken louder than any shout, any challenge, or any viral moment ever could. And as the TikTokers disappeared into the crowd, their heads low in silent reflection, it was clear that the true lesson had been learned, not through action or reaction, but through quiet, collective respect. The TikTokers had disappeared into the crowd, their heads down, the weight of their failed stunt hanging heavily between them. There were no harsh words exchanged, no confrontations, just the subtle shift of the crowd as they turned their backs on the group. And in that moment, the lesson was clear. Respect doesn't always come from rules or commands. Sometimes it comes from something far more powerful. Silence. The guard, still standing stoically, had said nothing. He hadn't moved an inch. His presence alone had been enough to create a shift. The lesson wasn't in any loud gesture, in any confrontation or protest. The lesson was in the stillness, in the quiet power of not reacting. He hadn't been a part of the drama. He had simply existed, unwavering, and in doing so, he had commanded the respect of the crowd without lifting a finger. As the camera panned across the scene, a gentle breeze stirred the flag above the palace gates, its edges rippling in the wind, the soft flutter of fabric breaking the heavy silence that had fallen. Over the area, the flag, like the guard, stood strong, unaffected by the noise of the world around it. It was a symbol of something deeper, something that transcended the chaos of the moment. The camera slowly zoomed out, pulling back to reveal the entire palace, its grandeur reflected in the peaceful calm that had overtaken the scene. The once bustling courtyard was now filled with quiet contemplation. The crowd that had gathered was no longer divided by excitement or amusement, but united in a shared understanding. The power of silence had spoken louder than any words or actions ever could. A voiceover, soft but deliberate, echoed in the background, capturing the essence of the moment. Respect doesn't always come from rules. Sometimes the silence of one person makes the entire crowd behave correctly. As the camera pulled further away, the palace stood majestic in the distance, the flag still waving, its colors vibrant against the blue sky. It was a quiet, powerful ending to a day that had started with laughter and ended with something much more profound. In the end, the guard had taught them all a lesson that no viral video could ever capture. It wasn't about making someone react. It was about the strength that comes from remaining steadfast in the face of chaos and the quiet power that can change the course of an entire moment. The screen faded to black, leaving the audience to reflect on the impact of silence, of discipline, and of the unexpected power that lies in doing nothing at all. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this powerful moment at Buckingham Palace. What do you think the real message was behind the guard's unshakable stillness? Was it the power of silence, or is there something deeper we can learn about respect and discipline? The crowd's reaction was subtle, yet profound. How did the shift in energy make you feel? Do you believe that sometimes silence can speak louder than words? We also want to know. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. It's always amazing to see how this kind of story resonates with people from all around the world. And if this video made you stop and think, make sure to share it with others. We want to know what you think about these unexpected lessons that life presents. Your comments help keep the conversation going, and we love hearing from you, whether it's your perspective on this story or your own experiences with the power of silence and respect. If you're enjoying these kinds of videos, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss out on the next one. We've got a lot more coming your way. Stories that make you think, reflect, and see the world in a new light. Keep the conversation going.